Desertification swept across the Sahara in 4000 HE. Frequent droughts caused the lakes to shrink rapidly, and our ancestors were forced to congregate around the few water sources remaining, but even here they faced the constant threat of starvation. Additionally, the drought extended into Southwest Asia, and farmers there journeyed in search of game in places where their crops could yield enough food for them to survive. These populations found themselves at the Nile River, itself shrinking, but still plentiful compared to the rest of the region, supporting grazing animals and edible plants. As populations increased, more groups turned to domesticated animals and crops to protect themselves in an unpredictable region. At first, these were small-scale and required little to ensure their maintenance, but within a few centuries, this all changed. This is Ancestoria, the gift of the Nile. As the desert crept in, the early farmers in this area increasingly clustered around two areas in the Nile Valley, leading to the eventual creation of Upper and Lower Egypt. By 6500 HE, the grasslands collapsed, and these groups became almost entirely dependent on agriculture. A scattering of villages and chiefdoms rose across the land, each taking advantage of their strategic location and resources. Over many generations, a few gained the advantage on their neighbors, absorbing at first their trade network and then their settlement into their own, both voluntarily and involuntarily. A power struggle continued throughout the region until Narmer, a southern king, defeated his northern enemy, uniting Upper and Lower Egypt, serving as its first pharaoh in 6900 HE. Narmer's victory marks the creation of the world's first nation-state and second civilization in the world after Sumer, which was characterized by Uruk's hegemony over southern Mesopotamia. Narmer instantly sets himself up as a god-king, spawning a cultural phenomenon where the prosperity of the nation was tied to the pharaoh. He and his bureaucrats created extensive national frameworks of myths to unify his people, reinforcing it through architecture, art, grand festivals, and rituals. The Egyptian worldview of the struggle between chaos and order was now contained by the strength of the pharaoh. In the unpredictable environment of northern Africa, death was a constant threat, a constant chaos. In the beginning, our ancestors needed a way to deal with their dead. Burial was a common practice, but with such limited fertile land, they could not bury them close to their settlements, and so they buried them in areas overlooking the Nile, bundled up in order to take up as little space as possible. Due to the dryness of the desert, bodies do not decay as rapidly as in other places, leading to a natural mummification. And although it began out of practicality, our ancestors connected it to life after death in an attempt to bring order to chaos. They began to bury them with important items, and the bundle position became symbolic of their new birth into the spirit realm. The body now needed to be buried in the desert in order to preserve the individuality of the deceased, as they needed a vessel more than just a skeleton in order to harbor the soul for all eternity. The bodies of the pharaohs underwent an intentional process of mummification very early on. They left only the heart. All other organs were pulled out and the body was washed. The heart was left because they believed it necessary for thought, while the other organs were stored nearby in order to reinsert them after rebirth. The body was then dried and completely wrapped in many layers of linen cloth. The third pharaoh, King Jer, had nearly 600 people sacrificed shortly after his death around 6990 HE in order to attend to him in the afterlife. This not only exhibits a strong belief in life after death, but also that the pharaohs had complete control, even the power over life and death of his subjects. Royal tombs evolved gradually until King Djoser's reign around 7350 HE. He ordered the construction of massive stone walls to surround his tomb complex in order to symbolize both his magnitude and eternity, because stone appeared to be a permanent substance as opposed to the mud brick of traditional Egyptian architecture. Inside the walls was a giant step pyramid, measuring more than 60 meters tall, the tallest structure on Earth at the time, symbolizing him as a god overlooking his kingdom. King Khufu's desire drove him further, and he commissioned the Great Pyramid in 7430 HE. 20,000 people worked on it over 20 years, with an entire city created to house the laborers, filled with workshops, bakeries, as well as numerous other specialists representing a microcosm of Greater Egypt. Infrastructure and bureaucracy were the foundations of the Egyptian state, facilitating coordination and cooperation. The vast bureaucracy oversaw, recorded, and maintained everything from the collection of harvests, irrigation, and construction of all works. They organized people through taxes, one part surpluses and the other labor, commissioning them to carry out mining, transportation, and construction to build both the grandeur and functions of Egypt. The records were kept by hieroglyphs, the world's second writing system, invented just 50 years after cuneiform. Although this was engraved on clay, it was also written in ink on papyrus, which was far easier to produce and store. This system of ink and paper would become the method for which the majority of writing took place right up until our modern day. Egypt was the first great state, ruled by a pharaoh of near absolute power, only tempered by the bounty of the Nile. An all-pervasive culture ate away at the independence of villages and legitimized the extensive bureaucracy that controlled the development of Egyptian society. From people simply seeking survival in an unforgiving land, they became the greatest power of the ancient world. This is Ancestoria, the history of our ancestors.